After the Tsar's abdication on the 2nd of March 1917, the political situation was intense. Two new political bodies were formed on the 28th of February, the Provisional Government, who claimed official power, and the Petrograd Soviet, who claimed genuine power in the eyes of the people. This period of dual power would ultimately lead to another revolution by the year's end. The Provisional Government had authority without power. That is, it took control of Russia through its role in government through the Duma. Headed by Rodzienko and talented orator Kerensky, its early policies included amnesty of political and religious prisoners, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of strikes and unions, and elections to be held in local councils. While these reforms should have quelled the revolutionary crowd, it was in direct conflict with the other newly formed political body, the Petrograd Soviet, whose power was derived from the city's soldiers and workers. This group kept pressure on the Provisional Government by, most notably, issuing Soviet Order No. 1, which demanded that no military orders from the Provisional Government were to be obeyed unless approved by the Soviet as well. This did not bode well for the Provisional Government and the Russian people's success in establishing a democratic republic led by a constituent assembly. Upon Lenin's arrival at Finland Station on April 3rd, the Bolshevik involvement in the February Revolution was limited. His return was significant, however, as he radically altered the course of the Bolshevik Party from supporting the Provisional Government to seeking exclusive power. Lenin's April thesis, released the day after his arrival on February 4th, became the blueprint for a continued revolution. Lenin was uncompromising. The February Revolution had not been a genuine class revolution, and his call for all power to the Soviets was an attempt at securing the control of government by the power base of the Soviet.
The wrath of Russia spilled into the streets of Petrograd on February 23, 1917. Mobs roamed the streets, armed with guns taken from government arsenals. Soldiers refused to fire on them. Some even fired on their own officers and then joined the mob. Crowds broke into prisons and released the prisoners. The capital was in chaos. Within a week, the Tsar abdicated his rule, and all of Russia celebrated. Lenin read about the revolution in a Swiss newspaper. The event he had worked toward, prepared for, and dreamed of was taking place in his country's capital, and Lenin wasn't there to lead it.
He was delighted to hear that the Tsar's government had fallen. He was undoubtedly panicked, though, that it was happening without him, because Lenin always distrusts spontaneous things. He doesn't want this revolution, therefore, to continue sort of in a spontaneous way. He wants it directed, and of course he believes he's the guy to do it.
As the victorious workers and soldiers celebrated, two groups began to form that would fight for power: the Provisional Government and the Workers' Soviets. The Provisional Government was Lenin's nemesis. This moderate group, composed of leaders of the Duma, was led by the passionate orator Alexander Kerensky.
He looked like a giant of the revolution. Lenin used to call him windbag Kerensky, and it's true that his main strength was oratory. Lenin would avoid trying to have oratorical duels with Kerensky because as a speaker, Kerensky really always prevailed.
Lenin supported the other contender for power, the Soviets, which were representatives of workers, soldiers, and peasants elected by the trade unions. From Switzerland, Lenin sent a blistering wire to the Petrograd Bolsheviks that read, "Our tactics, complete mistrust, no support for the new government. We especially suspect Kerensky." German officials could see that getting Lenin back to Russia to stir up conflict could help them defeat Russia in the war. They paid for a train to take Lenin and his followers through Germany and into Russia. The train arrived in Petrograd a month after the initial revolt.
Lenin's arrival back in Russia at the famous Finland station in April 1917 would have made a wonderful movie, maybe even a comedy. You see, his Bolsheviks back in the capital, led at this time by Stalin and Molotov, had been swept up in this whole idea of a successful revolution. The Tsar had been overthrown. Everybody is celebrating. Lenin gets off the train in a foul and nasty mood, immediately begins attacking and criticizing the guys who came to meet him, and then climbs up on a platform and begins shrieking at everybody that the revolution has only begun. What we have to do is keep the revolution alive, overthrow the provisional government, and move immediately to a socialist revolution.
Lenin's arrival at the Finland station is so steeped in myth and lore that many events are attributed to it that actually happened elsewhere. Here, in Sergei Eisenstein's 1927 film October, Lenin preaches to an adoring crowd of peasant soldiers who appear unified in their readiness for revolution. In truth, few people thought that Lenin's call for revolution was a good idea. His plan, known as the April Thesis, was so extreme that the editors of the Bolshevik newspaper Pravda refused to print it.
They were afraid that this call for down with the war, down with the provisional government, make another revolution, could be interpreted as giving aid and comfort to the German enemy. So they're afraid to put this stuff out front in terms of the party's program for fear of a possible backlash to it.
While Lenin argued with his party, the Provisional Government continued the war with Germany, sending battle-weary troops back to the front. But a disastrous battle in Austria ended all pretense of victory. Troops deserted by the thousands, and military discipline disintegrated. In July, the Petrograd military garrison was called to the front and refused to go. Instead, mobs of armed soldiers, fired up by the angry rhetoric of the Bolsheviks, roamed the streets, smashing windows, looting, and killing.
I'd like you now to turn to page 114 and 115 of your textbook and complete the attached worksheet.